Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. I have a good friend in the studio with us. You may recognize him, but I wanted people to get to know our statewide office holder, our state treasurer, Dan Elliott. Dan and I have been friends for a long time.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on. In fact, I will say this, don't often say this. I was one of the first people, I think, to support you. You called me very early on. And the reason I supported you so quickly and endorsed you through our PAC was because you'd taken a strong stand for marriage at a convention, stood up to the governor and the party establishment, and I knew you'd be a strong pro-family advocate, even in the office of treasurer. But I wanted to talk to you today a little bit for people who don't know. Let's start off, have people tell a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in rural Jennings County, and most people probably don't know where that is. That is almost the Ohio River. It's a county just north of Madison, Indiana, and I grew up in a very rural community. The little town that my mom and dad live in to this day has maybe 150 people on church on Sundays because the two churches fill up. It's very, very small. And grew up there and grew up very poor. I remember always as a kid, I was about 11 years old, I didn't get to do Boy Scouts and Little League because I was often helping my dad because he was a laborer. And so I was pushing a wheelbarrow of cement, and I was thinking this was a hot, southern Indiana summer day. And I remember this to this day, and I'm like, I do not want to do this the rest of my life. And I remember then and there, I said, you know what, I'm going to go to college. Yeah. And so I was first in my family to go to college. Before I went to college, I was fortunate enough to serve as a missionary for 2 years for my church in South America, and came back, met this amazing lady. She crazily said yes, and when she said yes, everything I owned was in a box. So did everything we tell a young man not to do. I followed her out to college. Okay. But it worked out. Yep. We've been married in May. It'll be 30 years. Awesome. We have 4 amazing kids. In fact, one of my kids is going to take the next big step in life. He's getting married in October. Oh, wonderful. That'll be the first of our kids to get married. My youngest is 12. Okay. So during that time, eventually we came back after school. We came back and settled in Morgan County about 22 years ago. And, a little farm out in the middle of nowhere. I'm a software engineer by trade. Started my own software company and got involved in my community. Became involved in county government and local government. But also during that time, I was a scoutmaster before scouts went a little weird. Eventually, our church left the scouts because of that. Have been and still am a 4-H dad. So that meant that during fair time, I'm hauling horses and projects all over the place. All my kids have been in 4-H. So just really a typical rural Indiana dad. And have enjoyed that life, still enjoy that life. A couple of years ago, like I said, I have a wife who, she had a lot of faith in me. When she said yes when everything I owned was in a box. She also said yes when I told her I had this crazy idea to run for state treasurer. And she said yes. So my daughter and I literally drove around the state of Indiana in an old pickup truck, put 80,000 miles on my farm truck, driving all over the state of Indiana, built a coalition of rural communities to get behind me, and won the Republican nomination for state treasurer, and then won the general election. And
you spent what? I'm going to guess 9 months doing that? Maybe it was a year?
It was a little more than a year. Okay. A little more than a year driving all over the state of Indiana.
And you won in the convention by one of the narrowest margins I've seen in a long time.
Narrowest
by 3
margin
votes.
is 3 votes.
Was on the third ballot? I was a delegate.
Third ballot. Yep. Third ballot.
It was a lot of fun.
It was.
Fun for me, maybe stressful for you.
I'm weird. I enjoy campaigning. And we had a plan going in. It's really kind of fun. Because my campaign, because it's from rural Indiana, the other candidates were from urban centers and great people, good friends. But I had a strategy, and my strategy really was kind of built off I'm a software engineer, like I said, so I had an if-then statement. If this happens, then I need to do this. And if this happens, I need to do this. And during our campaign, since we were very grassroots, had very, we were outspent by one candidate, outspent us by 5-1. We, most of my donations were from Morgan County folks. Then basically they gave me enough money to keep gas in the tank to put a couple mailers out. My team was my daughter, Jessica, who was a volunteer, and Taylor Bryant, who's a young college student, who was also a volunteer. Taylor was my campaign manager. And we just hustled.
Yep.
We hustled, worked hard, got a coalition of different folks to run or to work with us in these rural communities. As people kept dropping off, as you're supposed to do in these conventions, as soon as somebody would drop off, you'd go and rush over there and try to get their support. Interesting, we had a lot of the polls. This is why I'm never really a big fan of polls. A lot of the polls put us as the ones to be dropped off first. But those polls were really kind of centered in those urban areas. So they didn't take into account the support in all these rural communities. When that first ballot came out and we were hundreds of votes ahead of everybody else, then we knew we had a plan for that. And we boom, 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 methodically went through it. I didn't really have time to get stressed. I was like a jumping bean, going from one end of the convention to the other, just to find those delegates who were supporting this particular candidate. And when that candidate got dropped off, I'd go to them and say, okay, would you support me? And we just kept going back and forth till we got there. And at the end, it ended up being Elise Nashal and myself. I won by 3 votes. It was one thing I will always say about Elise. She is such a classy lady. I truly believe part of the reason that her and I were so close was because we were even though personality were very distinct.
But we had you were too conservative.
Exactly. Very, very conservative. Very pro-family. Local government experience. I mean, if you looked at our political experience, our political views, we were very, very similar. So I believe that was why it was so close. This is how gracious Elise was. After I won, she waited till I was done all the paperwork and everything else to congratulate me, but also immediately said, I want to help. I'm Team Elliott. And so she helped do fundraisers, helped me campaign, which again is what you should do. I mean, especially when you're so closely aligned, which is why when Tara Klutz decided to resign, it was very natural for me to say, I think it was within 1 hour, I called up Elise and I said, Elise, you should put your name in the hat. I want to get behind you on this. And she put her name in the hat, and a lot of us got behind her, and she was selected to be our next comptroller.
And I saw you guys just within a few days of the convention together. And you were very kind to each other, even on the floor. And I think, again, a God thing right there, because Elise is a great, and Elise's mom and I have been friends for decades.
Cindy's awesome.
Noe, former state representative. And so that was a hard choice for a lot of conservatives, because we've known Cindy, we know Elise, but I'm so glad in fact, I'll say this, I don't know of another time, at least in the last couple decades, where we have had so many conservatives as statewide office holders. You got Diego, Secretary of State, you got Elise, and you have you. And that's amazing.
One of the things that we've been all talking about here, we're really looking forward to what's going to happen in January. Again, no disrespect to our great elected officials that we have right now. They're all awesome. But of course, there's always change, and that's part of the process. But come January, with Mike Braun, Micah Beckwith, Todd Rokita, Elise, Diego, and myself.
I forgot to mention Todd,
then we will have, honestly, one of the most conservative, pro-family administrations that I think has ever existed.
I do too.
And I think it's going to be really good for Indiana. I think it's going to be good for conservatism. I think it's going to be good for families. Because, ultimately, part of how you and I became friends is because when I became very vocal about the importance of supporting the family. And ultimately, while government is important, and it is an important part of how we make sure our nation goes forward, at the end of the day, what we do to support families and strengthen families, that is the bedrock of society. I've said it before, I'll say it forever. this governments come and go, leaders come and go, but if we create the environment for a strong family, then we will prosper.
Well, and that is the reason we have so many social problems, crime, welfare. It's all breakdown of the family. But
Yes.
Now for our audience, and even for me, tell us about. A lot of people don't think much about maybe what a state treasurer does. Tell us about the office for people who don't know what your job is like, things you do. There's a couple of things I want to talk to you about you've done as a conservative, but just give us the general feel of what the treasurer's office does.
So the treasurer's office is very interesting because I love it. I'm very interested in it. That's why I ran, and I believe it's probably one of the most underrated offices at the State House because people don't realize all the treasurer's office does as involved in. So I'll start with the basics. Most people are aware that the Treasurer's Office manages money. I am the Chief Investment Officer for the state of Indiana. So we're knocking on the door of $17 billion of the state's funds that we invest.
Okay.
Now with that investment process, and this is constitutional, this is part of my constitutional office. With that investment process, I don't get to invest in Bitcoin. I don't get to invest in crazy
high risk
investments. It's really focused on things like bonds, treasury notes, commercial paper, things that are steady and that we can also create a lot of liquidity because what I have to do is when Elise, as we were mentioning, as our state comptroller, calls me up and says, well, we need X amount of dollars to pay these bills, I have to be able to liquidate that money and make sure the comptroller's office has that available. The other thing that I do is I handle the banking aspects of our state. So banks have to come, those entities in the state that want to use a bank, they need to go through us to make sure that they're qualified, that they are properly vetted and so forth. So we can't just go use, crazy bank from Timbuktu. We have to really have a good, stable banking process. Those are the two things that are constitutional, and a lot of people realize. And those are very, very important, and that could take up all my day right there. But the General Assembly has also seen fit to add some statutory duties onto the office. So one of the things that I do is I run 529 program.
All right.
For those people aren't familiar with 529, that is a program where you can invest tax-free your dollars so that you can save that for children for college. And when we say college, it started off with college, but now it can be trade school. It can be any higher form of education. So just because, Timmy, who's 5, and it's a great time to invest in Timmy when he's 5, he may not know what he wants to do at 5. Probably doesn't. My kids change their minds multiple times. That's okay. Maybe Timmy goes on and becomes a doctor. Great. Maybe Timmy goes on and becomes a mechanic.
Right.
And guess what? Mechanic probably make more money than the doctor these days. And so you look at that and you're like, okay, great opportunities there. Other thing that we do is I run the what's called the Invest Able program. It's a federally created program for people with disabilities. Okay. It used to be if you had severe disabilities, because you have to rely on a lot of government assistance to be able to make your ends meet. If you had too much money saved up, you would lose benefits. Well, being a conservative, what we all know, if the benefits are too high, then there's no incentive to do more. But that also created a problem that not only are Hoosiers without disabilities or with disabilities not saving, but they weren't even saving for some of the basics like vacations and things like that. So the federal government created a program called the ABLE program that allows people with disabilities to save. Recently, we upgraded that program. Used to be you had to have been under 21, so maybe somebody was either very young or born with a disability. We've changed that now to it's 46. Good. And that is specific for veterans. Okay. Because if you think about it, a young man, 25 years old, goes out, serves our country, gets hurt, IED or something like that. Suddenly he's disabled, but he can't he can't save, he can't buy a house. That's not good. Yeah. So anyway, that's a really neat program. And so as you see, a lot of these are investment related. So all that makes sense. Okay. But then I also run something called and this is where we started getting into something where this is why I got passionate about Treasurer's Office, local government. I run something called the Board for Depositories. The Board for Depositories is a investment program that saves money, or that helps us create an insurance program for local governments and banks. So in the past, as we know, we've had bank failures throughout the history of our country. Back in the 30s, we created the Board for Depositories to say, if you are a local unit of government, school district, town, city, county, state, and you have money invested in a bank, we insure that money 100%.
Okay.
It's actually the only one in existence in the United States. It's amazing. That means that your local county, if a bank fails, or your local school district, they're not going to lose their money if that bank fails.
It's kind of like an FDIC for banks for local. Okay.
Very much like that, except that we cover, FDIC only covers $250,000. $250,000. We'll cover the entirety.
Okay.
But it has to be one of our approved. It has to be an approved bank. And we monitor those banks. Then another thing that we do for local government that is really, really huge is the Indiana Bond Bank. The Indiana Bond Bank is a tool. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a bank that local units of government can use to get bonds to be able to build roads, bridges, lease or buy police cars, all the things that local government needs to do. If you're a bigger county, like say Hamilton County, you've got great credit, you're very large, it's easy for you, right? But imagine you're a small county like Posey County. Right. Or even that one of those towns in Posey County, because of the small size, your credit rating isn't going to be as good as these larger ones. Well, they're able to come to us as a bond bank. We're able to go through and bond for them, and then what happens is we pool all those bonds together with the credit rating of the state of Indiana. And what's beautiful about that is these communities are able to spend more of those very precious funds on the project and not on the interest.
Okay, yeah.
And then the last one that I do that totally surprises everybody, including other state treasurers, I run the Indiana 911 network.
The phone?
The entire statewide 911 network, everything until it gets into that little 911 center in each county. But there's a very large, expansive network. Now think about this for a second.
Do other states, is it Secretary of State the other states do? Or
usually
do they
it's governors. Usually the governors.
Okay.
It's usually under the governor's, somewhere under the governor's office. And think about this for a second. Of course, if you're talking about 911, you're talking about technology, right? You're talking about literally a big computer network. So Hoosiers have elected a software engineer, a nerd, to be the guy who runs the biggest network in the state. Not going to lie, my first meeting that I showed up, it was awesome because especially the first few months as your treasurer, you're learning a lot of things. I mean, that just is the nature of it. I go into this meeting, and they're having some issues and some problems, and so you had some engineers talking about how they're resolving the problem, and it was with TCP/IP ports. And so I started asking questions. Now, most of the other people on this board are people who come from public safety background, so this is not their world. And here I am asking all these questions. I'm a brand new treasurer. It's my first meeting as a 911 chair, and the engineers were like, "How do you know this? 25 years in technology." And they're like, "Okay."
There you go.
And it's actually come in very useful having my technology background with 911 because there's been a lot of technical issues, and right off the bat, I know what's going on. We're able to deal with AT&T and these other vendors. And there have been more than one time where I've said, you know what, when you come, bring an engineer. Yeah. Because we're going to ask detailed questions.
Good. Well, you've been in office 2 years. You've tackled at least two big issues I know that are outside of this realm a little bit. Not one of them, not so much. But your first year in office, you got behind some legislation on ESG.
I did.
Now, we've talked about this on the show before, but give our audience a little bit of information on what ESG is. It really fits into your will very well.
Absolutely. The ESG is a concept, environmental social governance, where liberal organizations will get other investment companies to get behind them and say, well, we want to push climate change issues. We want to divest from coal. We want to divest from fossil fuels. We don't think guns are good things. We want to do DEI structuring, and we're going to force these companies to follow these ESG practices instead of following returns.
Right.
I.e., a return is, hey, if I invest something, I expect a good return, more money percentage-wise. Instead, they decide with ESG, we're not going to measure how much money a company makes. We're not worried about what the shareholders want, shareholders being the people who own the company. We want to worry about what stakeholders want. Yeah. And stakeholders would be anybody who's interested in the company. Hey, I'm a stakeholder in NVIDIA because I like computers, but I don't have any stock in NVIDIA.
Right.
So should I be able to tell NVIDIA what to do? My theory is no. And so I ran on that as state treasurer. When I got into the State House, got behind in some legislation, and that was actually the most interesting thing. I think they've adjusted my style now, but in the beginning, I came in, and this was legislation that I ran on, so I got, myself and Representative Ethan Manning started working together to say, hey, how do we get this legislation across the line? And of course, the minute I did that, I had people come to me, people from the State House, lobbyists for other organizations, banking organizations, all these folks saying, Daniel, you realize a treasurer doesn't normally get behind legislation. You usually wait. And I'm like, why would I do that?
Right. You're dealing with those investments right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and I even had somebody say to me, well, Daniel, why don't you give yourself like a year or so to kind of really get your feet wet and figure out where things are and how things really work around here. And I said, no, you know what? Yeah. I was elected to do a job, and this is what I believe in. And so we got to work, my office with Representative Manning and the General Assembly. We started working on this issue right away. And it was interesting because the pushback was insane. In fact, one of the things that happened is somehow somebody had put out a fiscal, because they put anything that has to, any bill has a fiscal associated with it. And the funny thing about that fiscal is, of course, and it was all over the paper, $6.7 billion fiscal. And I'm like, what? Yeah. It's only a $45 billion pension fund. How would it have a $6.7 billion fiscal attached to it? I'm like, that doesn't make sense. So I started asking questions. Whoa. And like, wait, what? You're not giving me answers. Right. Where did you come up with these numbers? Well, here are our numbers. I'm like, yes, but you're not telling me how you came up with these numbers. And here's what it was. They said, well, eventually, it took me weeks to get down to this. We came up with this number with the assumption that every single investment asset manager in the country would stop working with us. I'm like, you realize we're like one of the most well-funded investment pension funds in the country. Why would they stop working with us? We generate a lot of revenue. Right. And they're like, well, that's our theory. And I'm like, okay. So then I went back to the General Assembly and said, well, here's the basis of that number. And the General Assembly was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Right. So we pushed back, got a new fiscal. When we got the new fiscal, you know what it was? $50,000 a year.
Yeah, that's a big difference with 6-point-something billion.
Yeah. Now, what's really fascinating to me, and here I'm going to kind of poke our friends in the media really hard here. What's really fascinating to me, when that $6.7 billion fiscal came out, oh yeah, that was in every paper. Every paper. Yep, when they redid the fiscal, and it was $50,000 a year.
Nowhere. Yeah.
Nobody said a word. Yep. Even to this day, I'll get occasionally, it's like, yeah, you might want to go recheck your numbers. But what I found is, when you're willing to push hard, when you're willing to stand up for what you believe in, when you're willing to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to fight for this, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to just accept that it can't be done. It can get done. We got that bill passed, and in fact, just here recently, we, the first entity that we called out because of utilizing ESG practices was BlackRock. Yeah. And BlackRock's not happy with me right now. That's okay. Yeah.
But so the bill's been in place for about a year. We divest from ESG companies, or we're trying to do returns first. And all the doom and gloom sayers, did that happen? Everything's fine. I haven't heard any stories.
Yeah, absolutely. We're still doing great. Our investments are still increasing. I think we're at $47 billion now for our pension fund. In fact, I was at a conference recently with some other treasurers, and everyone was talking about how their pension funds were funded like 35%, 35%, and they're very proud of that. And when it was my turn to talk about our pension funds, I'm like, we're at over 90%, and we're set to be in the next couple of years be 100% funded, which is very, very, very rare.
Now, I know we were one of the early states. I mean, at the time you addressed this issue, it was a big issue everywhere. How many states have followed our lead or done this? We weren't the first, but I know we were one of the first.
But we were one of the first, and I think our law is probably one of the stronger ones. This is what I. In that same conference, I pointed out something because I was in New York City. We were talking about these different ways of doing things. You had California and Illinois saying how much they were proud of their ESG commitment and how they were going to measure ESG versus returns. And I actually said this to the and again, when you're talking about Illinois or California, they're very large investment funds. And I pointed out that's true. These states have very large investment funds. But now when you start to add Indiana, Florida, Texas, Ohio, Kansas, Oklahoma, suddenly we are just as large, if not larger, than these large states. But what's more interesting, and I said this to these investment fund managers, I said, unfortunately for you, you're going to have to deal with a world where California wants one thing and Indiana wants something else. Yeah. And that is just the nature of business now. And so, but when they were talking about how well funded they were, at the 30 and 35% range, I'm talking 90%, going to be soon 100. There's
That's unheard of too.
Yes. Yeah. It isn't just, and this is where I'm going to get real nerdy, it isn't just about a percentage that looks really good on paper. It's also because what they're forced to do is they're forced to chase returns. So during upticks in the economy like we have had, especially under the Trump administration, they had to get 18, 15%, returns on their investment. Now, and that's unfortunate because what happens is when there's a downturn, that's going to hit them hard. Yeah. It's going to hit them really hard. We have been kind of steady Eddie. We're Midwest. We're just kind of, we're conservative, in everything we do. And so what that means is we are only having to chase a return of about 6.25. So that means that when there's a downturn, we'll still be chasing around 6.25, which is all very realistic. Right. Yeah. Again, kind of nerdy, kind of very numbers based, but then again, you probably want a nerd for a treasurer. But in the long run, what that means, and this is something I actually said. I said this to the number 2 guy at BlackRock. He was we were talking about this ESG issues, and obviously we had a difference of opinion. And what I said to him was simply this. I said, look, I as I mentioned earlier, I grew up poor. My family, most of my family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, they all have to survive off of pensions. That's what they're going to do in their retirement years. And so for me, I see this as something I deal with every day. And I said to this person who flew in on a jet, I said, look, I have to worry about that person who is a teacher, a highway worker, somebody who's dedicated their life to serving their communities. All they want to do in their retirement years is be able to visit their grandkids and maybe go to Florida once or twice a year. They should never have to choose between paying for their mortgage or paying for medicine. Right. And he was like, wow, that's really powerful. I never thought about it that way. I didn't say this. My mother taught me to be polite, but in my head, I said, of course you didn't think about that. You flew in here on a private jet. Right. Your world is very different than the average Hoosiers.
Yeah. New York values.
Yeah.
Well, in year 2, you tackled something that is kind of outside your duties, but not for a statewide office holder. and I don't talk about this issue a lot, but I know it's important, and a lot of our audience is concerned about it. I'm concerned about it. But several years ago, the State House put in metal detectors. And that eliminated people from concealed carry, although we've expanded concealed carry options and things like that. And you got behind the idea of allowing statewide office holders to carry, because legislators can carry in the State House. Honestly, I'll be honest, I've been down there 30 years. I used to carry all the time until the metal detectors went in. And I'll just say this, you don't have to comment. I've told my wife this before. We go to a concert. I hate metal detectors. A metal detector just tells me I can't protect myself.
Right.
It says I'm going to be defenseless if the bad things go down, because they will go down whether they're metal detectors or not.
Yeah.
But I also, and that's not your motivation, but you are a target. Every office holder is a target. So we allow General Assembly members to protect themselves, use their Second Amendment if they want to. But we didn't have that cut out for statewide office holders, including the governor. Now the governor's got, state police, but I don't know if you do. Do you have?
Nope.
Okay. So you push to allow statewide office holders to concealed carry in the State House.
I did. It was actually, I just assumed I could carry.
Right.
So, back up a little bit. Again, I grew up in Jennings County.
Sure.
I live in Morgan County. I am as rural Indiana as they come. I've taught my kids how to shoot since they were little. My dad taught me how to shoot. It's just those of us from rural Indiana, we realize that's just part of who we are.
Right.
So, and I just assumed I could carry when I came in. And then the first day I come in the office, I'm like, I leave my gun in the truck. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. Which isn't very comforting in downtown Indianapolis.
No. And so, and then I found out that, the state reps get to carry, and their staff gets to carry. So I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I get to carry? And I was told, well, that's the governor's policy. And this, nothing to do, again, Eric Holtman's a strong Second Amendment guy. I'll say that about him.
His wife's a big-time shooter. She's like a very good shotgun shooter.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, but my first thought was, I am a separately constitutionally elected office holder. How does the governor get to set policy? He doesn't get to set any other policy in my office. He doesn't get to tell me what hours we are there, what things we do.
And you're there late at night. You walk out to your parking lot late at night.
I will tell you that there have been many times where I'm leaving at 10, 11 o'clock at night. I was an entrepreneur before I became state treasurer. Long hours are part of the job. There's things that need to get done, and it doesn't stop. It never stops at 5 o'clock. Anyway, so I was like, why does the governor get to tell me what policies I have in my own office? And so, but I was told, nope, you can't, because, now some folks had said to me, well, Daniel, you're the treasurer. No one's going to search you. You can carry if you want. I'm like, no, I also believe in following the law.
Sure, yeah.
And so I'm going to do what is proper. So when I found that out, I'm like, all right, let's get a law passed. But so we weren't able to do it in the first year just because we didn't have enough time to get everything in order. Because again, that wasn't something I was surprised by that. But on the second year, we were able to get Senator Toms to push forward a bill that would allow the statewide elected office holders to make their own policy regarding firearms for them and their staff. Unfortunately, it got killed in a House committee.
Okay.
And but also I learned a long time ago that you always have a plan B. So our plan B, we were able to get through conference committee. We were able to get the ability for statewide to carry.
So that means it must have passed in one chamber.
It did. It passed in the Senate.
Okay.
Passed in the Senate. Passed in the Senate.
Okay.
Without even it was smooth sailing, which you always think it'd be the opposite.
Right, in the House,
but on the House, they wouldn't let it get past the committee, and so we went through another path, and we're able to get it thrown in as an amendment, attached. I shouldn't say thrown, attached as an amendment. We got it attached as an amendment. Unfortunately, the only part we could get attached on the amendment was the ability just for the statewide office holders to carry. That's a plus. So we had a win. but I also am very concerned about my staff because, while I'm there, when I'm in the office, I can protect my staff. There have been multiple incidences that have happened to my staff out in the parking lot. And I try to, if they're working with me late at night, I'll walk them to their cars. But oftentimes I'm working late at night, they're going home at 5, and some of these things have happened in the middle of the daylight.
In broad daylight.
Oh,
yeah.
So I'm a firm believer that we need to be able to, I have an amazing team, and they need to, there's anything that I should be able to do, they should be able to do as well.
Well, I'm just thinking in the world we live in, unfortunately, there's crazies out there. If, heaven forbid, one of our statewide office holders, Todd Rikita, I could see Todd being a huge target.
Absolutely.
I mean, if somebody attacked him, because he's alone sometimes too. I've been in events with him myself.
Absolutely.
He usually takes staff, but that could be crippling to our state government.
Well, and think about this, and and believe me, I did not do it for any of the above reasons, but an interesting topic. I never thought I would be able to be involved in international politics, and I did, and that is, in these tragedies of October 7th last year, when the Israeli people were brutally attacked, the worst attack since the Holocaust.
Right.
Being the chief investment officer, Israel, through an entity called Israeli Bonds, came to me and said, "Hey, you guys have Indiana has some investments in Israel. Would you be interested in increasing it a little bit?" And I, for one, did not realize we had so few investments in Israel. I'm like, well, gosh, this is a great investment.
Yeah.
So when they said, "Hey, would you be willing to do, the small increase?" I'm like, "No, we're going to double it.
Yeah.
We're going to double our current investment in Israel."
Because Israel's a very high-tech country.
Very high-tech.
Very prosperous.
Very
Probably
prosperous.
a pretty good investment.
It's excellent. It's actually one of the better returning investments. So I look at this. First off, I'm going to stand with Israel. They're our friends. So that's a no-brainer anyway. You stand with your friends. During 9/11, I remember they stood with us.
Sure.
So first off, we stand with them during this difficult time. Second off, it's a good return. So when you get to help a friend and make money.
Sure. Did you get threats from that? Is that where this is going?
I did. Oh, I have.
Yeah.
I still do.
Still do. Wow.
Still do. But here's the thing. Whether I could carry or not, I'd still do that.
Well, sure. Yeah.
But
it's a reality that you don't want to be in a position where you don't make decisions because you're afraid.
No.
Or don't make decisions because you can't protect yourself. But
it's the same reason all of us carry. I mean, you want to be able to say, okay, I've never had to pull my firearm. Hope I never have to.
Right.
But I carry because if I have to do something, and whether it's me or somebody else, let's say someone else needs protecting, I would never want to be that person who says, "Oh, I won't stand up to protect the innocent because I might get hurt." I was not raised that way. And that's the same principle. That's why everyone I know who carries more to defend other people. They're more worried about helping others. Their family, friends, strangers. It's part of what we do because we don't live. This is not the world is not a pleasant place.
Right.
And so we have to be able to say, what can we do to make sure we protect ourselves and our friends?
Well, our timer's not on, and we've gone. It's felt like 5 minutes. I'm sure it's more like 20. So as we wrap up, is there anything you're looking forward to in the next 2 years in your term that you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's two things. One we've done, but we're in the middle of affecting this change. When I first got in, I mentioned the bond bank, the Indiana Bond Bank is an important tool for helping local governments. When I first became treasurer, I found the Indiana Bond Bank was limited by statute to only be able to help communities or help do a bond up to 10 years. And if you're in a rural community, that's not very effective. When you're building a bridge, these major projects are 20, 25 years. So I recognize that, and I took to the General Assembly, look, I'd like for the Indiana Bond Bank to be able to bond out 20 and 25 years because this could really help our rural communities. They don't have many of these don't have big factories and big income producers. They need help being able to do really good things for their community. What is their vision?
Yeah.
But they want to be able to do that, but they may not oftentimes have the funds unless they can bond it out to 20, 25 years. Took that idea to the General Assembly, thought it would take me a couple years to get across. We got it done in a few weeks.
Oh, okay.
And so now we can do that.
Okay.
And so we've been given that authority. So one of the things, part of the reason, as you know, I travel all over the state, and I am on the road. Like last week, I was on the road 4 or 5 days. One of the reasons we do that is because we want to reach out to these communities and say, what are your projects? How can we help you? So that's part of what I'm looking forward to doing and continuing to do. But one of the things that we're also looking at doing, and the two things that I'm really looking forward to trying to do in the future, they're connected, is I want to modernize the Treasurer's Office. The Treasurer's Office is great, but we're doing a lot of things the same way we did them back in the 50s and 70s.
Sure.
And with modern technology and coming from a technical background, that just doesn't make any sense. So I'm working, there's a bill that we're going to be we're hoping to get across the line this year that will help us modernize some of our banking practices. And I'm putting a really big push on cybersecurity and AI. Already in my time as treasurer, through the programs I do run, 911 and some of these investment programs like Trust Indiana, I've been able to increase our cybersecurity awareness, create some programs that made sure every county was able to get a cybersecurity assessment at the 911 level.
Okay.
And considering so many communities have actually been hit through with cybersecurity attacks, and these are and I say this all the time. These are not kids in mom's basement hacking in. These are nation states.
Yeah,
Iran, Russia, China.
Yeah.
These are the people who are hacking in. So when you think about that, that's a lot for little Morgantown.
Well, the last thing you want to go down is 911.
Yes. So
that could cost lives.
It could.
Yeah.
And so first thing we did was set up cybersecurity assessments so we could see exactly where we're at and do that for every county. We're continuing to improve that, and I like to see us be able to expand that across the state and to be able to help rural communities with their cybersecurity defenses. Yeah. So I got lots of cool things we want to do, and yes, they're nerdy, but
that's okay.
For me, that's my world. I'm very happy with that.
Well, I appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Mike. I
see you often out across the state.
I want to thank you for all the work you do, and especially your organization. One of the reasons you and I first became friends because we see eye to eye and helping strengthen families. Yeah. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming on today.
Appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it tells you a little bit more about what the Treasurer's Office does. We also mentioned the comptroller. If you haven't heard that used to be called the state auditor, just FYI. Same office, they changed the title to kind of fit better. But I appreciate Dan Elliott, the state treasurer, joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I'm Micah Clark with American Family Association of Indiana.